Welcome to the lecture. Today we will study the phylum Echinodermata. So you may have heard about the starfish and that of the sea urchins. They belong to this phylum, and it is the last phylum in the case of non-chordates under the clade deuterostomes. So deuterostomes are the organism in which the blastopore that forms the anus, and it is categorized into the phylum Chordata and a group of organisms under the name Ambulacraria, which is further divisible into the phylum Hemichordata and phylum Echinoderms. And Echinodermata includes the animals though they have the radial symmetry, and it also includes the organisms which have the bilateral symmetry or they are asymmetric. Those are known as homozoans. However, these organisms they have been extinct. At present, the Echinodermata that includes the extant taxons, and those includes the Crinoideae, Apharoideae, Astroideae, Echinoideae, and Holothroideae. So in this lecture, we will gonna see the general characters and the classification of phylum Echinodermata. So this clade Deuterostomia that includes about 60,000 living species. Among them, about 7,300 species they belongs to the phylum Echinodermata. This phylum also includes about 15,000 species in the form of fossils, and includes the organisms like that of the starfish. This is the feather stars, sea cucumbers, sea urchins, and these are the fossilized form of sea lilies. If we talk about the size of the organism, that is very diverse, which vary from minute in size less than 1 centimeter, and it can be organism which have length more than 3 meters. So in this, the starfish they could be of this proportion. The sea cucumbers they can be enormous in size. If we talk about the habitat, they are mostly marine individuals. They can't be present at the terrestrial habitat or that of the brackish water or the freshwater, because in these animals there are no specialized respiratory, excretory, or the osmoregulatory organs. And among the marine habitat, they are mostly the benthic organisms. So they live on the sea floor. However, the larvae of these organisms they make important part of the pelagic ecosystem. So the larvae they present on the sea surface. However, the adult that lives on the sea floor. If we talk about the habits of organisms, they can be herbivores like that of the sea urchins. They can be predatory in nature like that of the sea stars, and they can be filter feeders. So as the case of the Crinoideae, which include the sea lilies and the feather stars. If we talk about the cleavage, these animals have the indeterminate, holoblastic, and that of the radial cleavage. So indeterminate means the fate of the cells that is fixed later in cleavages. In the case of holoblastic, whole of the cell that divides into complete daughter cells. The radial cleavage, the shell that is the, if these are the parent blastomers, the daughter blastomers they will totally overlap the parental blastomers. So these are the daughter blastomas, this is the blastomeres. So the daughter blastomeres, they will totally overlap the parent blastomeres when we see from the top. There is a very interesting property in the case of echinodermata, that is the mutable collagenous tissue, that is MCT. So what happens? So for an organism for its defense against any kind of predators, or for maintain its posture, there is very much need to maintain the body stiff or soften at different time periods. However, for this softness or for this stiffness, the organism requires muscles to contract or relax, which requires very high energy. And these organisms, the echinodermata, they do have the low respiratory rate, so they must require to conserve the energy. So not using this mechanism, they have the specialized connective tissue, so which can have the property that they can change their physical properties. So they can be stiff at a moment and they can be soft at another moment. So, and this transition lies under the neuronal control rather on the muscular control. So by using these properties, the echinodermata, they are very energy efficient. So we have already discussed about the symmetry in the case of echinoderm. So they do have the radial symmetry. And if we talk about in general in the case of animal kingdom, the symmetry that could be radial in the case of lower animals, which includes in phylum Porifera, Cnidaria, and that of the Ctenophora. However, the organisms belong to these phylums, they were primitive and they were sessile. So this sessileness that is associated mainly with the radial symmetry. However, these echinoderms, although they are radial in symmetry, but they do have the power for the locomotion. So why this radial symmetry and locomotion that lies in the same organism? So there is a theory like these echinoderms, they metamorphosize from the larvae which have the bilateral symmetry. And as we know, there is a theory that is known as recapitulation theory, which says there is the ontogeny that follows the phylogeny. So by that means, so these bilateral symmetry larvae that shows some kind of phylogenetic relationship to their ancestors. So the ancestor of these echinoderms, they must be bilaterally symmetrical. So they have those advanced feature for the locomotion. So that's why these echinodermates, they get this ability. However, this transition from bilateral symmetry to the radial symmetry, that is depicted by a theory that is known as axial theory, that is based upon the inferences that get from the structure of larvae and how the larvae that is developed into the adult and the body wall morphology of the adult. So based upon this theory, we will gonna see how this bilateral larvae that change into the adult radial symmetry. We will cover this EAT in the development section. So let's talk about the body wall and the skeleton of echinodermata. So the body wall consists of outermost cuticle, followed by epidermis, dermis, musculature, and innermost coelom. So this dermis layer that is originated from mesoderm, and it secretes the plates of calcium carbonate and small proportion of magnesium carbonate. So these plates along with the organic cell mass, they forms the stereome, which is the endoskeleton component of the echinodermata. And at some places, like this is the dermal layer, this is the epidermis, endermis that secretes the plates of calcium carbonate. These plates can come out at some places from the epidermis, from the dermal pores, and these outgrowths, they are known as the tubercles. These tubercles, they can have the articulated appendices on their top. They could be the spines or they could be the pedicellariae. These pedicellariae are like that of the pincer shape, and they could be open or they can be closed one. Either spine or the pedicellariae, they are provided with the muscles, and these muscles, they help them to move. So they help in the clearing of some kind of debris on the surface of the animal, and they also help in the defense. So if we see the dried up stereome of an animal, that will look like this. However, in the living one, these spaces that you are seeing in the stereome, they are occupied by the connective tissue, and that tissue, that is known as stroma. So if we see the living one, so this is the starfish, you can see the rough appearance of the body of the organism, and this bumpy or rough appearance, that is due to the presence of tubercles, spines or the pedicellariae. One of the striking characteristic feature in the case of echinodermata is to have the water vascular system, which is composed of fluid filled canals and that of the reservoirs. It is very pertinent here to mention that rather than using the dorsal or the ventral side in case of echinoderm, it is preferred to use the oral and the aboral end. And the oral end is the one where the mouth is situated, and the other end is known as the aboral end. So in the case of starfish, like we can see here, so here the mouth that is situated, and the other end that look like this, that is known as the aboral end. So at aboral end there is anus that is situated, and on the oral end the mouth is situated at the center of the central disc. And the mouth that have some kind of grooves that are running over each arm. These grooves on each arms, they are known as the ambulacral grooves, and from these grooves some fleshy like projection, they are emerging. These are known as the tube feet. So they maintains the water vascular system, and they helps in the case of locomotion, the gas exchange, the feeding, attachment and the sensory perceptions in the case of animals. In the case of water vascular system, major component that includes the madreporite, the stone canal, the ring canal, the radial canals, lateral canals, tube feet, and on the ring canal there are certain bodies that are present, which are the Tiedemann body and the sac-like structure that are as the outgrowth of the ring canal. They are known as the Polian vesicles. So one by one we will gonna see them. So the first component is the madreporite. So you already have seen the aboral surface of the starfish, and this prominent thing that is present, that is known as madreporite. So it is a hard, rounded and a calcareous plate that is present where the two arms, they are meeting on the central disc. So that position is known as interradial. And if we see this madreporite and high magnification, we will gonna see various radiating grooves and the furrows. And if we cut the section of the madreporite, we will gonna see like this. So its surface that has furrows and grooves, and those furrows, they have the pore in them, and those pores, the water that enter inside, and the canals that get formed, those are known as pore canals. And numerous pore canals, they opens into the collecting canals, and numerous connecting canals, they opens into the ampulla. And this ampulla that act as some kind of reservoir, and the madreporite surface, the inner one, that is lined by the cilia, and these cilia, they helps to for the continuous entry of the water. And this madreporite that act as a sieve and opens into the stone canal, that is the second component in the case of water vascular system. So stone canal is the S-shaped canal in between that of the madreporite and that of the ring canal. So this is the madreporite, this is the stone canal, and this is the ring canal. So, and the name stone canal is due to the fact that if we cut the section of stone canal, its wall that is lined by the stereome that has the circular plates in all the length of its tube, and internally this stone canal that is lined by the cilia. And if we see this stone canal, that is not just independently that is going from the aboral to oral end. However, the stone canal that is also surrounded by the axial sinus. So likewise, if we see the section of this complete framework, so it will be look like this. This is the stone canal which is lined by the axial sinus, and this axial sinus that also surround the axial gland. These axial gland and axial sinus, they forms the hymal system. We will gonna see this hymal system in the case of circulation, and this axial gland, axial sinus, and the stone canal, they forms the axial complex. And this stone canal that opens into the ring canal which surround over the esophagus. And in the case of starfish, this ring canal that is pentagonal in shape. So very prominent structural body that are present on the ring canal, they can be present on its inner surface or toward the outer side. So those are present on the inner side, those are known as the Tiedemann body, and those present on the outer side, those are known as the Polian vesicle. Polian vesicles are sac-like things that are present. These Tiedemann body, they produce the coelomocytes and help in the phagocytosis. In the case of the estrias or the starfish, where the stone canal that opens into the ring canal, that interradii that only contains one Tiedemann body. On the other hand, every other interradial position that is occupied by the two Tiedemann body. And in the case of Polian vesicles, these are the sac-like thing. They help in the storage of fluids, which help in the regulation of pressure in the water vascular system, and they are present in the interradially regions. So the ring canal that is surrounding the esophagus, that will give the projections of canals to the radial axis, and those are known as radial canals. These radial canals that are present in between the arms. So if we see the oral side of an arm, so this is the umbilical groove, and in between this the radial canal that will be present, and the lumen of the radial canal that is continuous with the lumen of the last tentacle, and this last tentacle that function as the photoreceptor. And these radial canals, they will give the another group of canals on either side, and these canals are known as the lateral canals. These lateral canals, they will gonna give the fleshy projections, those are known as tube feet. So these fleshy projection you are seeing here, these are the tube feet. And these lateral canals, they also bear some kind of walls on their wall. So these walls, actually, they prevent the backflow of the fluid from the tube feet. The last component in the water vascular systems are the tube feet, which do have structure like that of the sac and elongated part. The sac-like thing is known as ampulla, The elongated part is known as podium, and the terminal disc is known as sucker. And the ampulla that is provided mainly with the circular muscles. The podium that is provided maximum with the longitudinal muscles. So what happen now? So when there is a contraction for the circular muscle in the case of ampulla, so that will provide very high pressure on the podium, to that by which the podium that will gonna elongate. So the tube feet, they will gonna increase in their length. And on the other hand, when the longitudinal muscles, they will contract, the fluid that will gonna go back into the ampulla. So that's how these tube feet that will gonna work. And the growth of these tube feet that happens by the rule that is known as ocular plate rule. So like this is the young starfish, this is the older starfish. So there will be a continuous increase in the number of tube feet. However, the newer feet that will arise near the terminal tentacle and the terminal plate, that is also known as ocular plate, and the oldest tube feet that are present near the central disc. So this is known as the ocular plate rule. So let's review the water vascular system that consists of the madreporoid that is present on the aboral end. It communicates with the ring canal by the means of stone canal. So this is the ring canal which give projection to the radial axis, that is known as the radial canal. And the radial canals, they have the lateral projection to the either side. Those are known as the lateral canals. Lateral canals, they give the tube feet as lateral appendages, though consist of ampulla, podium, and that of the sucker. The ring canal that also consists of some structural body on its inner and outer surface. Though they are present on the inner surface, they are known as the Tiedemann body, and the sac-like thing on the outer surface, they are known as the Polian vesicles. Let's see the functions of water vascular system. So as we have already discussed that this system that is required for the respiration, excretion, feeding, as well as for sensing of other stimuli. So first is for the locomotion. So what happens in the case of Echinodermata, or especially in the case of starfish? The arm that is raised from the substratum toward where the organism want to move, and the lateral canals which were occupied with the walls, these walls, they get closed. The circular muscles that present in the ampulla, in the tube feet, they get contracted, which increase the hydraulic pressure in the tube feet. This increase in the tube pressure increase the length of feet, and they get elongated toward the direction of movement. And the terminal part, which is the sucker in the case of tube feet, that get totally adhere with the substratum. Now the longitudinal muscles in the case of the podia, they get contracted, which decrease the pressure inside the podium, and the water or the fluid that again move inside the ampulla, which decrease the length of podium. And in this process, the body that raised and moved to newer direction. So that's how the locomotion that happen in the case of echinoderms. These tube feet, they are also used to open the shells of the mollusk in case of predatory starfish. And these suckers that are present in the podium, they also mediate the attachment of the echinodermata with the rocks. Regarding the habit and physiology of feeding, the echinodermids, they are particle feeders, scavengers, predatory, and they are herbivorous in diet. Most of them, they do have complete digestive tract. They have the mouth as well as the anus. The alimentary canal that typically consists of mouth, esophagus, stomach. Stomach is divisible into two parts, cardiac stomach and that of the pyloric stomach, which opens into the intestine and opens exterior by the means of anus. So you can see the vascular system here also, the madreporoid that opens at the aboral end. It gives the process of stone canal which forms the ring canal around the esophagus, and these are the radial canals. So this is the longitudinal section. If we see the alimentary canal from the aboral end, this is the cardiac stomach, and cardiac stomach that forms the pyloric stomach, and the pyloric stomach that give processes in each arm. So 5 processes they are present in the case of starfish, and these processes they get again bifurcated into 2. So in each arm there are 2 pyloric cecas that are present. These are known as pyloric ceca, and if we cut the transverse section of this arm, we will gonna see like this. So these are the 2 pyloric cecas that are present on the aboral end, and this pyloric stomach that opens through the intestine into the anus. And if we see the physiology of feeding, that the echinoderms they also have another characteristic feature, like they can evert out their cardiac stomach through their mouth. So what happen now, these tube feet that are present on the oral surface, they held the muscles of the molluscans very tight, and they open up their shell. Now the cardiac stomach that will be everted out through the mouth, and it secrete the gastric enzymes on the molluscan body. Now the digestion that takes place externally, and the partially digested food that will be taken up. That partially digested food that will be gone to the pyloric stomach, where the digestion and the absorption both happens. So some of part of the digestion that happens in the case of pyloric stomach, and some of the cells of the pyloric stomach they also do some digestion. So external digestion, extracellular digestion, and intracellular digestion, that all happens in the case of echinoderms. And some of them, as we have seen, like they can be herbivorous in diet, so they also have a specialized thing, the chewing apparatus, also known as the Aristotle lantheren, and mostly in the case of sea urchins. So it consists of various plates or the ossicles which are attached with the muscles, and they helps in the scraping of food like that of the algae from the substrate. Coming to the circulatory system, it is required for the transportation of gases, nutrients, and the waste material. So these functions that already have been performed by the water vascular system, which is derived from the coelom. Another system that is derived from the coelom is the Hamel system. It is composed of canals and spaces and consists of 3 Hamel rings. One is oral in position and 2 are aboral in position. The oral Hamel ring that is present below the ring canal and run parallel to it. The ring that give its processes alongside that of the radial canals. The aboral Hamel rings, one is present to surround the pyloric stomach and give its processes throughout the pyloric cecas. Another Hamel ring surrounds the intestine and give its processes to cover the gonads. The Hamel systems, they are surrounded by another coelomic channels which are known as perihemal sinuses, and these 3 Hamel rings they are jointed by the axial sinus. So this is the same axial sinus that covers the stone canal and that of the axial gland. So axial gland is the spongy tissue that is enclosed by the axial sinus, and axial sinus, axial gland, and the stone canal they forms the axial complex. So this axial gland that is very important in case of echinoderms, because it is reported that the germ cells that forms in the axial gland and later they are migrated to the gonads for the maturation. Regarding respiration, excretion and osmoregulation, the echinodermates, they are primitive in nature. They lack any specialized organ for these physiological functions. As the 2 feet, they are thin and they are continuous with that of the coelomic fluid, so that makes them excellent organ for these functions. Another accessory organs for these functions are the dermal branchiae. They are the extension of dermis outside the epidermis. So like this is the epidermal layer, so this is the dermis that extended over the epidermis and that enclose the coelom. So they are also thin in nature and they are moist, so they are also the excellent structure for these functions. In the case of sea cucumbers, there is another thing that is present, that is known as the respiratory tree. So this is the respiratory tree. In the case of sea cucumbers, it takes the water from the anus and the water that get filled in this respiratory tree, and this tree that present alongside that of the hemal system. So this is the hemal plexus that has high concentration of carbon dioxide, low concentration of oxygen and high concentration of ammonia. On the other hand, the water that is present in the respiratory tree that has low concentration of carbon dioxide, high concentration of oxygen. So the diffusion happens in between the two, and later on the water that is egested out through the anus. The echinoderms, they are the primitive for their nervous system too, and they have the decentralized and the diffuse nervous system without any significant ganglia. It is composed of 3 neural rings. One is ectoneural, hyponeural and entoneural. The ectoneural and hyponeural, they are oral rings, and the entoneural, that is the abolar ring. Ectoneural as well as the hyponeural, they both surrounds the mouth, where the hyponeural that is present deep in surrounding the mouth regions, the ectoneural that present superficially. So this ectoneural, this is the main nervous system in the case of modern echinoderms, and it gives the radial nerve throughout each arm. This radial nerve that give it its extension to the ambulacral groove, and this that nerve that will give some kind of ring around the circle of the 2 feet. This ectoneural system, this is both motor as well as sensory. On the other hand, the hyponeural system, that is mainly the motor nervous system, and it is derived from the mesoderm. On the other hand, the ectoneural system that forms the ring around the anus, and it is mainly reduced in most of the modern echinoderms, and in some it is totally absent. However, in the primitive one like that of the crinoids, mainly in the case of sea lilies, this nervous system is the primary nervous system, and it forms the motor as well as sensory functions in those organisms. However, in the case of the modern echinoderms, it is only in the motor nervous system, and this nervous system that is again derived from the mesoderm. Coming to the regeneration, reproduction and development in the case of echinodermates, the regeneration property in case of these animals, that is very enormous, which includes the replacement of the body parts when they are under the attack. So if we see a starfish, and if one of the arm of the starfish, if that is being cut, so the organism can have ability to grow it back when it has the central disc. And this property of regeneration, that is very prominent in case of Asteroideae, Apharoideae and the Crinoideae. Those include the starfish, brittle stars, sea lilies and the feather stars. So for example, one of the starfish that is known as Lyncia, so if one of the arm that is being cut and even if it is without the central disc, that single arm that can grow whole of the animal. So this regeneration property that can also employed for the asexual reproduction in this case of Echinodermata. As these echinodermates, they do belongs to the clade Deuterostomiae, which have the close connection to the humans. So scientists, they are always see the cellular mechanisms and the genes that are associated with this enormous power of regeneration, which can help the humankind. Regarding the reproductive abilities in the case of echinodermates, most of them they are gonochristic, so they are dioecious organisms, but some hermaphroditic species they are also known. And among them, they may have numerous gonads or they can have the single gonads. So for example, the starfish that have two gonads per arm. On the other hand, the holothroids, the sea cucumbers, they only have a single gonad per organism. The fertilization in the case of Echinodermata, that is mainly external one, and development in the case of these animals, that is indirect. So there is must a larval forms in between egg and that of the adult. Those includes the Betylariae larvae of the Crinoideae, Bipinnaria larvae of starfish, the Brachyolariae larvae, again that of the starfish, Ophiopluteus larvae of the brittle star, Echinopluteus larvae of the Echinus, and that of the Auriculariae larvae, that of the sea cucumbers. So these are the larval forms of Echinodermata. The common thing in these is to have the bilateral symmetry. However, the larvae, they get metamorphosized into the radial adults. So what is the basis of this transition from bilateral to radial? That is explained by a theory that is known as extra-axial theory. So one more common thing that is present in the case of Echinodermata or Deuterostomium clade, that is to have the tripartite coelom. So coelom that is present in three compartments, namely the procoel, mesocoel and the metacoel. They are also known as the exocoel, the hydrocoel and the somatocoel. So like you can see exocoel, hydrocoel and the somatocoel. The exocoel and that of the hydrocoel, they are connected through the stone canal. So this is the same canal that will gonna forms the water vascular system. The exocoel and that of the hydrocoel, they are open outside through the hydropore. This hydropore that will gonna give the madreporite. So now what happened in the larvae? This left hydrocoel that start enwrapping the mouth, and this enwrapping forms the ring canal. So this is the left hydrocoel that forms the ring canal, and from this ring canals, various canals they are formed. Those forms the radial canals now. So now this is a step toward the pentamerous symmetry. Now what happened? The right exocoel and the right hydrocoel, so mostly they get vanished. The left exocoel that get forms a bird-like structure that helps the larvae to bind with the substrate, and the leftover exocoel that forms the axial sinus. This axial sinus that will forms the Hamel system now, and the left somatocoel along with the left hydrocoel, they forms the rudiment. So it is the rudiment which forms the axial part of the body wall of the organism. The other thing except the rudiment, like that of the right somatocoel along with the other body parts, they forms the non-rudiment part and forms the extra axial body component. So most of the part they get vanished when the larva that metamorphosize into the adult, and the adult that get the radial symmetry. So this is the transcript of extraxial axial theory. So these are the primitive echinodermates. This is also primitive one. This is the sea lilies or Crinoideae. This is the axial body wall that is derived from the rudiment, which formed from the left hydrocele plus the left somatocele. This is the non-rudiment part of the larvae, and it includes the extraxial part. The extraxial that again divide into two, the perforate and the imperforate one. So the perforate body wall that has the pores on body, that could be the dermal papillae or other things that are present. So on the perforate one, there will be the pores that will be present, and in case of imperforate, there will be no dermal pores. So these are the extant taxons. So like this is the starfish. You can see the umbilical part that is derived mainly by the axial body wall, which is derived from the rudiment, and rudiment that was derived from the left hydrocele and that of the left somatocele. So these are the echinoids. So this is all about for the general characters. Now we will gonna see the classification of the Echinodermata. So the phylum Echinodermata, that is divisible into the three subphylum, including the Crinozoa, Astrozoa and the Echinozoa. The subphylum Crinozoa that has a single class, that is the Crinoideae, that includes the sea lilies and the feather stars. And the subphylum Astrozoa that include two classes, Astroideae and Aphroideae. Astroideae that include the sea stars, and Aphroideae includes the brittle stars. The subphylum Echinozoa that includes two classes, Echinoideae and Holothroideae. Echinoideae include the sea urchins, and Holothroideae includes the sea cucumbers. So there is just a key to identify the echinoderms of Astrozoa and Echinozoa. So if there is a organism that has 4 or more radiating arms, so they must be belongs to the Astrozoa. And if they have prominent central disc and there is a clear cut difference between the arms width to that of the central disc, so they belongs to the brittle stars. And if the width of the arm that is the same as that of the central disc, they belongs to the Astroideae. And if they don't have those kind of arms, then they belong to the subphylum Echinozoa. And if the body is elongated, that is belong to the Holothroideae. So the first class is class Crinoideae, which includes the most primitive members under the phylum Echinodermata. They do have flower-like body and which attached with the substratum by means of stalk. So these are the sessile kind of organisms, which include the sea lilies. And the modern counterpart of these Crinoideae, they do lack the stalk. In place of that, they do have cirrus. So the modern counterpart, they have some ability for the locomotion. So for example, this includes the feather stars. And their body that have the central disc that is known as the calyx. And this calyx that bears both mouth as well as anus on a single side. So like if this is the TS of a feather star, so the mouth as well as the anus, they lie on a same side of the body disc. And they don't have any madreporite spines or the pedicellariae on their body. So as there is no madreporite, so there will be no water that will gonna enter in their water-vascular system. So the system that mainly runs on the coelomic fluid. They do have very low metabolism, and thus because of this they can live thousands of years. They are mainly dioecious one. They can be oviparous, or they can brood the eggs. And the development that includes larvae, that is known as doliolaria larvae. So these are the crinoideae. For example, there is Antedon. So this is the feather star that belongs to the order Tulita. The next class is a class Asteroideae. This is the most common class in the case of phylum Echinodermata. So they are present in all sea except the low salinity areas. They are mainly the bottom dwellers, so they are mainly the benthic, but they can be present in the littoral zone. But when they present, they forms a group in large number. So like they get aggregated in a same place. The body size, they can be they can be less than 1 centimeter, and they can have the diameter of 1 meter. So like giant Pycnopodia, they can have more than 20 arms. They can be of different colors, mainly the pentamerous symmetry. The oral surface that have the mouth that has the umbilical grooves and have the podias. On the other hand, the aboral surface that include the anus, that include the spines, and also include the dermal branchiae and the madreporite. The sea stars, they can be the scavengers, they can be the suspension feeders. However, most of them, they are carnivorous or predatory. So like we have seen, they have engulfed the molluscs and the crustaceans. They do have the complete digestive system, so the mouth as well as anus that is present. However, in the case, as we have seen in the case of feeding, the cardiac stomach that is everted out outside the mouth. So only the partial digested food that is taken up by the stomach. So a very less amount of undigestible matter that is present in the pyloric stomach, which can be everted out through the mouth or through the anus. So there is a very less functionality of anus and the intestine in case of Asteroideae. They do have very enormous power of regeneration, which can be used for the asexual reproduction. They can be dioecious, they can be oviparous, or they can brood the eggs, or they can be viviparous. They includes the larvae, which includes the bipinnaria and the brachylaria larvae. And for example, we have seen the starfish, which belongs to the order Forcipolatida. The next class is class of Asteroideae, which includes the brittle stars. These are the most advanced among the echinoderms, and they are present mainly in the benthic habitat. They do have the central disc intact and distinct one, and with have the long arms. So the width of arms that is very much different from that of the central disc. The madreporite that opens around the central disc and towards the oral end. In this case, the digestive system that is incomplete one. So there is a mouth opens into the stomach by the means of esophagus. However, they lack the intestine and the anus. And they also lack the pedicellariae or that of the dermal branchiae, which were used for the respiration. So here the respiration that is performed by that of the bursae, and these bursae, they are the invagination in the gonadal slits. They also have reduced the water vascular system, as they don't have the tube feet with the suckers of the or the ampulla. So and these tube feet, they mainly plays the role in the case of feeding. However, there is a very little role in the locomotion. They have the free swimming ovipositor larvae, and they have enormous power of autonomy. Like the predator, if they catch one of their arm, so they will gonna set this arm, and later on they will gonna regenerate it. So the one of the example is Ophiotherix, which belongs to the order Ophiurida. The class Echinoideae, they include the sea urchins, and they are present in all the seas, mainly the benthic kind of organisms. Their body is somewhat hemispherical in shape, and they do have the umbilical grooves that are running all over the body, which are in 5 multiples. They do have many colors. They could be the brown or black, etc. And on their oral side, there is Aristotle lentiran that is present, which consists of the ossicles and that of the muscles, which help the organism in the scraping of food from the substratum. They do have very long tube feet around the mouth regions and also have a ring of gills that surrounds the mouth. They also bear numerous movable spines. There may be the pedicellary one, which can be poisonous to the enemies. The one of the characteristic individual in the case of Echinoidea is the Echinus, which belongs to the order Echinaceae. So this is the Echinus here. The last class in phylum Echinodermata is the class Holothuriidae, and they makes about 90% of the biomass in the ocean floor, which make them to rule the deep ocean. They can be ranged from 3 cm to 3 meter long, and they can be of various colors. They don't have any kind of arms, so the body is elongated in structure, but they do have the umbilical areas. So these dots you can see here, these are the umbilical areas. And the body, as it is elongated, that has the oral and the aboral end. The oral end that consists of mouth, and mouth that is guarded by the buccal tentacles. These tentacles, they are just the modification of the tube feet, and these tentacles, they can be retracted inside the mouth. They are relatively sluggish as comparison to the other member of this phyla. They are the suspension feeders, and they also have the respiratory tree for the respiration. We already have covered this in the respiration section. There is the madreporite that is also present, but that is not the external pore. Madreporite that is present inside the coelomic fluid. So for the water vascular system, they do rely on the coelomic fluid. They do have another property that is known as evisceration. So in this, what happens when the body that is accumulated with a large amount of the excretory waste, so in that case the organism is able to discard its intestine or alimentary canal in a part of, and later on that part of intestine that is again regenerated. And they also have tubules of Cuvier. So these are also associated with that of the respiratory tree, you can see here. So these are the emergence point of the Cuvier tubules, which can be the white, pinkish or red tubules. So what happens? So when a predator that is following the sea cucumbers, they can bombard these Cuvier tubules through the anus on the organism. So these are actually toxic, and which retards the predator to attacking them. They are hermaphroditic individuals, and they do have only a single gonad. One of the characteristic individual is the sea cucumber, that is the Cucumeria, that belongs to the order Dendrochirotida. So this is all about for the general character as well as for the classification of phylum Echinodermata.